Rebecca said that when she made her first terrarium, she didn't really know what she was doing, but it has become a passion.
Yes, very much. It started as a hobby, and I'm addicted to it, and I absolutely love it and call myself a terrarium-aholic because I love it so much.
I think that's a pretty good addiction to have. And what exactly is a terrarium? What's the definition of a terrarium?
So there's two kinds of terrariums. There's opened and closed, but a terrarium basically is growing plants, or actually any living. There's a lot with animals also, but we're focusing on plants today.
Oh, that's right. You could have a terrarium with animals. Sure.
And usually more commonly a closed environment, which is what we're going to focus on most today. But there's also open terrariums, like this one here in the cylinder. An open terrarium is kind of more like a potted container. A terrarium must always have a clear surrounding, like a glass jar. You can use colored glass if you like, but you don't want it to be opaque. And the open terrariums have the plant in a glass container, but no hole in the bottom, basically. And a closed terrarium has the lid on it. That's the most common kind.
And it needs to be, the closed ones particularly have to be glass or clear because the sunlight has to come in, is that correct?
Yes, your lid can be opaque, like the one we're doing today, but the sides need to be clear so the sunlight can come in. So the plants can grow.
Okay, well, and you've got some beautiful ones here, and tell me, some of these containers are very elaborate. Is it getting to be more and more challenging for you?
Yes, more and more. I always like to try to find the really unique containers now. I started very simple with actually just a canister, which is the one here on the left. And then as I really dove into this hobby, I got more and more elaborate. The ones in the front are beautiful, different ornate glassware. One of my favorites is a Wardian case, which looks, it's in the front here, that looks kind of like a greenhouse.
It does.
Really historic type of terrarium. So the more I got into it, the more and more ornate I got with my containers, and have some that are even hanging. But it's great to start simple when you're doing it the first time.
Now, you keep yours inside, and what exposure do you give them?
A bright window. They want to have a bright window. If you have a darker window, your plants aren't going to grow as well. But the brighter the window, the better your terrariums are going to grow.
So you don't want the sun to shine directly on it and burn them up, but just real bright.
Right, exactly.
Well, do you think we could learn how to do one?
Yes, best way to learn how to build a terrarium is to do it hands-on.
All right.
There's a few things you need to know, and I'll tell you what they are as we go through building it. So one of the most important things is activated charcoal. Activated charcoal is what allows the air to stay clean in your terrarium. It helps with any of those scents you might get from water sitting in there with it being a closed container.
So it won't smell musty.
Right, and then the carbon helps purify the air as it's being closed.
Well, where do you find activated charcoal?
At a pet store. You actually get it at a pet store, and it's used for fish filters commonly, and it's a great tool to have in your terrarium and really important to have for a successful.
So how much of that are we going to put in, Rebecca?
So depending on your terrarium size, you just want to sprinkle some in the bottom. It's no magic number.
I'm going to see what it feels like.
Sure. And then you just want to kind of spread it over the bottom. It won't completely cover it. You're not putting a very thick layer, but it just allows you to gently cover it. There's no magic science to it because it depends on your container size.
Okay. All right. So we've got activated charcoal, not too much, just a little bit on the bottom.
Just a little bit.
That's the first step. What comes next?
Next is the potting soil. And the potting soil is nothing fancy. You can use potting soil that has fertilizer or the little white perlite pieces in it, or you can just use plain potting soil with none of it in there. And that's what we have here. And you want to make sure that you only do with this container this size around 2 inches.
Now, why don't you want to just fill it all the way up?
You get less and less room for your plants to grow.
Oh, okay.
And so, you know, some of the more taller ones that you have, you can put more soil in there because it has more room to grow. But you don't want to go crazy on your soil. So I would say this is a really good
And I think it's fun to see what happens when they do start to fill up. I think you said it's fun because it just looks like a real little jungle in there. If we can see on this one, the plant has grown to kind of fill the pot.
Yes.
So we want to give it plenty of room to do that.
I have some that look a little bit more overgrown. I like that look in that part of my house, and some that kind of look more exactly put together. So
we have activated charcoal, just a little bit, and then potting soil, just any good potting soil. And then what's the topping that we've got?
Peat moss. So you can buy peat moss at any local garden store. You're going to buy it most commonly in a block.
A block, because you don't need a whole bag.
Right. What you want to do is you're going to pull off part of that block and soak it in water, a bowl of water, because peat needs to be moist. You're going to then take your peat, a handful, you're going to squeeze it out. I pre-squeeze this, but you can see some water coming out of it.
Yeah.
And then you're just going to sprinkle it on the top.
Now, what's the purpose of the peat moss?
Peat helps retain water. helps retain moisture, so you don't have to water as often.
All right.
And it's really nice with peat is it turns light brown, and it kind of gives you a signal that you need to water soon.
Oh, so a visual clue. Okay. Well, it looks good so far, but I think it's going to get real exciting now.
Yes, now it's time for the plants. With the plants, peperomias, which is the one that I'm holding, are really great. They're hard to kill. Great
That's good.
starter plant for a terrarium.
Okay.
You can also use aluminum plants. You can use mosaic plants. Ferns are great for high humidity environments. But you're just going to take your little plant out. Made a little bit of a mess. Every gardener does. And then you're just going to kind of shove them in there. There's no science. Just remember that on this one, you're going to see the outside edges. So I want it to look pretty from the outside, not from just the top.
Okay.
So you can keep on adding more and more and more.
I'll hold this here and you can dump the extra soil there. Okay.
So you just keep
And
on
it's
adding
fun
them
because
in.
even though they're not flowering, we've got a lot of color, texture, size difference.
Yes.
It's a very lively grouping of plants. So you can make selections so that it's very interesting.
Exactly. Rarely are you ever going to have terrariums that really bloom for you. But a few times you can do a few different things. African violets, some orchids, but you just want to kind of add them in.
I think we'll start simple.
It's best to always start simple. Sometimes you have to come in, add a little bit of soil on the top, just like you would pot a container.
Sure.
And then you're going to just kind of baby them and let them grow in some.
And then what's this last thing we're going to pop in?
These are, you can use begonias, you can do all kinds of things.
Okay.
These I had been just potting up in my house. They're really nice and tiny. And you can just stick them in. Now you don't want to always overfill on them, but you can just stick him in there.
Okay.
And that's probably all
Already
I put in
really
this
attractive. Now, how about getting it settled in and watered? How would you go about doing that?
Well, what you want to do is then take a cup of water and just lightly water the top of it.
All right.
You can also put it under the sink, but you want to be careful. You don't want to overwater it.
Because it doesn't have a hole in it, so be really careful about overwatering.
But a cup is really nice. You can control it
Okay,
a lot
just slowly
easier.
till you feel like the soil is damp. And then, do I go ahead and put the top on?
Well, I'm going to show you what you do after that. So after that, if you're in a really bright window, you want to make sure that you spray it about once a week. So you just spray it, and then you do that, and then you're good to go. And then you put the top on.
Okay.
Now you have a beautiful terrarium.
So about once a week, go around and spray it. And you said that you sometimes like to kind of air it out a little bit. How do you do that?
I do. Every few weeks I like to come and I like to take the lid off just to give it some fresh oxygen. And also a lot of times if it's in a bright window, it'll start to fog. And then when it starts to fog, mine's near a vent in my house, so it gets cold and hot very quickly. Kind of just clears it out, and then I just put the lid back on.
Okay, so take the lid off for a day or so and then and keep back at it. And the fertilizer is not much of an issue, you said.
I never fertilize my terrariums. You can if you'd like. If you do, I choose using a water-soluble fertilizer. Put it in your spray bottle, like a 10-10-10 or a Super Thrive. You can spray it every time.
Okay, well this is great fun, and I'm afraid that you've probably started more people on the path towards terrarium addiction, but I think it's pretty cool, and we'll hope you'll bring them back to visit, and I'm going to try my hand at it. I think it'd be fun on these hot days to do some gardening inside.
I hope so. I'll probably have even more the next time I come.
So. Cool, all righty, well thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.